"Forgive me, but I must kneel before you." Daniel Hayes blinked. For a brief second, he assumed the translation implant in his ear had malfunctioned. Because the tall alien woman standing in front of him, surrounded by diplomats, soldiers, and representatives from half the known galaxy, had just lowered herself slowly onto one knee. The entire Grand Assembly chamber went silent, not the polite diplomatic kind of silence. The stunned, impossible kind. Hundreds of alien delegates froze in place beneath the enormous glass dome of Illyrian Station. The structure was so vast that stars were visible through the transparent ceiling, glittering against the black of space like distant fires. No one moved. No one even whispered. Daniel remained standing there with a glass of something blue in his hand, halfway through taking a sip. He said slowly. He glanced behind him, then to his left, then to his right. "Are you sure you've got the right human?" The alien woman did not stand. She remained kneeling calmly on the polished obsidian floor. Her skin carried a faint silver glow beneath the chamber lights, almost like moonlight trapped beneath glass. Long, elegant ears curved slightly behind her head, and her violet eyes held a strange depth, like distant nebulae shifting behind a thin veil. Daniel had noticed earlier that many alien species looked vaguely humanoid. But this one looked regal, dangerously regal. She bowed her head slightly. "I have found him." That was when the murmurs began. At first they were faint, just small pockets of confused whispers spreading across the enormous hall. Then the whispers grew louder, because everyone present understood exactly what they were witnessing, and it made absolutely no sense. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "Okay," he said carefully. "I feel like I missed a very important meeting." Several alien diplomats stood from their seats. A tall reptilian ambassador with emerald scales leaned forward sharply, his slit pupils narrowing. "That is the Aurelian royal heir," he hissed quietly to the delegate beside him. Another ambassador, a pale being with translucent skin and softly glowing veins, looked equally stunned. "Aurelian nobility do not kneel." The reptilian's voice dropped even lower. "Not to anyone." Across the chamber, translators struggled to keep up as dozens of species began speaking at once. Daniel slowly lowered his drink. "Right," he muttered. He looked down again at the alien woman kneeling in front of him. "So we're definitely not doing a cultural dance or something." A small sound escaped from somewhere behind him. Someone had tried very hard not to laugh. Daniel glanced back. His colleague from the human diplomatic team, Mara Collins, stood near the edge of the human delegation area with both hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide, utterly horrified. She shook her head violently. No. This was not normal. Daniel sighed. Great. He looked back down at the kneeling alien woman. "Okay, listen," he said quietly. "I appreciate the dramatic entrance, but you might be confusing me with someone important." The alien woman slowly lifted her head. Her violet eyes met his. For the first time since she had entered the chamber, the air in the room seemed to change. Not visibly, but something subtle passed through the crowd. Recognition, fear, respect. Daniel felt it even if he couldn't quite explain it. "Daniel Hayes," she said softly, his brow furrowed. "Yes. You are Daniel Hayes of the Terran Union Expeditionary Service." "That sounds like me." "You were stationed on the outer frontier 12 cycles ago." Daniel shrugged. "Long time ago. You were present during the evacuation of the Helios Rift civilian convoy." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. He hadn't heard that name in years. Maybe. She studied him carefully. The faint glow beneath her silver skin pulsed gently. "You remember the burning transport ships?" A faint silence spread across the nearby diplomats. Daniel exhaled through his nose. "Well," he said quietly, "that part's harder to forget." The alien woman bowed her head again. "And yet you do not understand why I kneel." Daniel rubbed his face. "I'm going to be honest with you." He gestured toward the massive chamber around them. "This whole situation is already about 10 levels above my pay grade." The whispering across the hall intensified. Dozens of alien representatives had now moved closer to the central floor, forming a loose circle around the scene. The Aurelian delegation stood nearby as well, tall, luminous beings with calm expressions. But even they seemed unsettled. One of them stepped forward slightly. "Princess Elira," the officer said carefully. The title moved across the chamber like a wave. Daniel blinked. "Princess." He pointed gently toward the kneeling woman. "You're a princess?" Elira looked up at him. "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked around the room again. Hundreds of alien diplomats. Galactic leaders, military envoys, every eye in the chamber was now locked onto the two of them. Then I feel like we should really stand up and talk about this somewhere less public. Elira did not stand. Instead, she spoke a single word, a word in a language Daniel did not recognize. But the translation system in the chamber activated instantly. And when the translation appeared across hundreds of diplomatic consoles, the reaction was immediate. Gasps, shock. Several delegates rose from their seats. One alien officer actually dropped his datapad. Daniel frowned. Okay, now I'm worried. Mara rushed forward from the human delegation area. Daniel, she whispered urgently, do you have any idea what she just called you? He shook his head, something dramatic judging by the reaction. Mara swallowed. That title is used in Aurelian history. Daniel looked at Elira again. She remained kneeling, watching him with calm, luminous eyes. What does it mean? He asked. Mara hesitated, then spoke quietly. It means. She glanced around the chamber, the one who saved their people. Daniel blinked. Silence stretched across the chamber. Then he slowly pointed at himself. I think you've got the wrong guy. You do not understand what you did. The alien woman's voice carried across the chamber with quiet certainty, and the whispering that had begun moments earlier spread into a restless storm of conversation among the gathered delegations. Daniel Hayes stood very still, mostly because he wasn't entirely sure what the correct body language was when an alien princess was kneeling in front of you during a galaxy-level diplomatic summit. He glanced at Mara again. Is there a handbook for this situation? He murmured. Daniel, she whispered back urgently, this is the situation. Across the chamber, security drones hovered into motion. Sleek metallic spheres drifted silently along the perimeter as Illyrian stations, diplomatic protocol systems tried to regain control of the gathering. But it was too late. The moment had already detonated. Delegates from dozens of alien civilizations were now standing, leaning forward, whispering, recording, and analyzing the scene. A tall, slender being with luminous blue skin stepped forward from the crowd. His elongated fingers clasped behind his back as he studied Daniel with clear fascination. This is the human. His voice was calm but edged with disbelief. Another alien beside him, shorter, with dark crimson eyes and long curved ears, tilted her head. He appears unremarkable. Daniel sighed quietly. I'm really starting to hear that a lot. The blue-skinned diplomat stepped closer, examining him openly. You are the Terran officer from the Helios Rift evacuation. Daniel shrugged. Logistics officer, technically. Logistics. The alien repeated the word as if testing its meaning. Behind them, a reptilian delegate hissed softly. That evacuation was a disaster. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Yeah, he said quietly. I noticed. The memory crept back whether he wanted it to or not. Burning ships. Civilian transports ripping apart under missile fire. Thousands of refugees trapped in a collapsing convoy near the edge of the Helios Rift. Daniel pushed the thought away. Across from him, Princess Elira finally lifted her head fully. Her violet eyes remained fixed on him. You boarded the final transport. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Someone had to. You returned 3 times. Myra looked at him sharply. You never told us that. Daniel shrugged again. Wasn't important. A ripple of disbelief spread through the nearby diplomats. The blue-skinned alien frowned. 3 rescue runs through an active bombardment. More like 2.5, Daniel said. The 3rd one ended with the engines exploding. That transport carried thousands. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's usually what civilian ships do. Elira's luminous skin glowed faintly brighter. You carried children from the burning corridors. Daniel shifted slightly. Okay, now we're getting into very dramatic storytelling. Her gaze did not waver. You opened the evacuation gates when the convoy command ship was destroyed. That part I remember. You prevented the entire refugee fleet from drifting into the Helios Rift gravity well. A murmur passed through the chamber. Several alien diplomats exchanged uneasy glances, because the Helios Rift was not just another region of space. It was a violent gravitational anomaly capable of swallowing entire fleets. Daniel shrugged lightly. Navigation systems were down. You manually realigned the convoy's escape trajectory. Daniel blinked. That's in the report. It is in our asterisk records. The blue-skinned diplomat folded his long arms. And what exactly were you transporting during this heroic rescue, human? Daniel scratched his temple. Civilians. What civilians? Refugees from the frontier colonies. The alien leaned closer. Species. Daniel paused, honestly. He shrugged. Most of them were in sealed cryopods. The chamber went very quiet. Elira spoke softly. Those cryopods contained Aurelian civilians. Daniel blinked. Oh. A beat passed. Okay. Mara stared at him. You didn't know. He shook his head. Evacuations don't usually come with passenger biographies. The blue-skinned diplomat frowned deeply now. You rescued an Aurelian royal convoy without realizing it. Daniel rubbed his face. That convoy never mentioned it. Elira's voice remained calm. It could not. Another ripple of whispers spread across the chamber. The reptilian delegate hissed again. Aurelian refugee transports are classified. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Well, that explains the lack of communication. One of the diplomats stepped forward sharply. Do you understand what that means, human? Daniel looked around the room, based on everyone's reactions. He pointed gently at Elira. Apparently, I gave your empire a very dramatic Tuesday. Several diplomats looked scandalized, but a few others, especially from smaller civilizations, were watching him with something closer to admiration. The blue-skinned alien turned toward Elira. Princess Elira, if what you claim is true. He gestured toward Daniel. This individual unknowingly saved members of the Aurelian royal lineage. Elira answered without hesitation, yes. The chamber exploded into conversation. Several ambassadors immediately began issuing quiet orders through their communication implants. Others stared at Daniel as if he had suddenly transformed into something entirely different. Daniel raised both hands. Okay, hold on. No one listened. This is getting very large very fast. Still no one listened. Finally, he looked directly at Elira again. You said something earlier, he said carefully. Her gaze remained steady. You called me a title. Yes, Daniel gestured toward the surrounding chaos. I assume that's what caused all this. She nodded. The title is ancient. Daniel sighed. Of course it is. A tall Aurelian officer stepped forward from the royal delegation. His luminous eyes studied Daniel carefully. Among our people, the officer said, that title is given only once in many generations. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Please don't tell me it's something dramatic. The officer spoke calmly. It is given to the one who saves our people from extinction. Silence swept across the chamber again. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. Extinction feels like a strong word. Elira rose to her feet at last. She stood nearly a head taller than him, her silver skin glowing softly beneath the chamber lights. The Helios Rift incident destroyed half our refugee fleet. Daniel looked at her quietly, but not all of it. Her violet eyes held his. Because of you. Another murmur moved through the assembly. Some diplomats were now watching Daniel with something closer to calculation, others with open respect. And a few, with growing concern. The reptilian ambassador leaned toward the blue-skinned diplomat. If the Aurelians truly recognize him, that alters political balance. Daniel noticed the whispers. He groaned quietly. Oh no. Mara looked at him. What? He gestured toward the entire room. I think I accidentally started a galactic incident. Elira studied him again, then spoke the words that made the entire chamber freeze once more. This was not an accident. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She looked at him as if weighing something ancient and important. Then she said quietly, our oldest records speak of a guardian who would appear when our people faced annihilation. The blue-skinned diplomat's eyes widened. You cannot mean. Elira's gaze never left Daniel, the quiet one who saves without knowing. The chamber fell into stunned silence, and Daniel Hayes suddenly had the uncomfortable feeling that the galaxy had just started paying a lot more attention to him than he ever wanted. I think everyone is getting carried away. Daniel Hayes said it quietly, but the words echoed strangely across the suddenly silent chamber. Hundreds of alien eyes were still fixed on him, some curious, some respectful, some deeply uneasy. Princess Elira stood only a few steps away, her luminous silver skin glowing faintly beneath the starlight filtering through the massive glass dome above the assembly hall. The translation systems had long since fallen quiet. No one was whispering now, no one was interrupting. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I mean, look, he said awkwardly, gesturing slightly around the chamber. I appreciate the dramatic moment. Really, but I didn't save a civilization. He shrugged. I helped evacuate a convoy. Across the room, the reptilian ambassador narrowed his golden eyes. You entered a collapsing combat zone. Yeah. You boarded a transport already marked for destruction. Technically, it wasn't destroyed yet. You returned 3 times. Daniel sighed, again with the counting. Soft laughter rippled through a few of the smaller delegations. The tension cracked slightly, but the Aurelian representatives remained perfectly still. Elira's violet eyes never left him. You are uncomfortable with recognition, she said. Daniel snorted lightly. I'm uncomfortable with being called a galactic myth. The blue-skinned diplomat stepped forward again, long fingers clasped behind his back. Human Daniel Hayes, he said carefully, your actions altered the fate of a Royal Aurelian refugee fleet. Daniel shrugged, okay. You prevented the extinction of thousands. All right, you changed the political future of an entire civilization. Daniel rubbed his face. That one feels like a stretch. The diplomat tilted his head. Why? Daniel looked up toward the transparent dome above them. Stars shimmered quietly beyond the glass. Because, he said calmly, I didn't do it for any of that. The chamber waited. I did it because people were dying. The words were simple. Not dramatic, not heroic, just honest, and somehow that made them heavier. Elira studied him in silence. The faint glow beneath her skin pulsed slowly. You still do not see it, she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. See what? That is exactly why the title belongs to you. The chamber shifted again. Some diplomats leaned closer. Others exchanged glances. Daniel sighed again. Look, he said, if this title thing is important to your culture, I respect that. He gestured gently toward her. But you don't need to kneel to me. A faint ripple moved through the Aurelian delegation. Because that sentence alone would have been unthinkable from almost any other species. Elira looked at him for several long seconds. Then she did something no one expected. She smiled. It was small, but unmistakable. You misunderstand our customs. Daniel frowned slightly. How so? I did not kneel because you demanded it. I definitely did not. I knelt, she said quietly, because honor requires acknowledgement. The room fell silent again. Elira slowly turned toward the assembled civilizations. Her voice carried clearly across the chamber. My people are ancient, she said. We have seen empires rise and fall. Her luminous eyes moved across the gathered ambassadors. We do not worship power. She gestured lightly toward Daniel. We honor courage. The words settled across the hall like gravity. The blue-skinned diplomat exhaled slowly. The reptilian ambassador lowered his head slightly. Even the more skeptical delegations seemed less certain now. Elira turned back toward Daniel. You risked your life for strangers. Daniel shrugged again. That's kind of the job description. You did not know who we were. Nope, you expected nothing in return. Daniel nodded once, still don't. Elira's voice softened. That is why you matter. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said something very quiet. Well, that's terrifying. A small wave of laughter broke across the chamber. Even the Aurelian officers behind Elira allowed faint smiles. The tension that had gripped the summit for nearly an hour finally began to loosen. Diplomats relaxed. Security drones drifted back toward their stations. The galaxy, it seemed, had not shattered after all. Elira stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see faint patterns of light moving beneath her silver skin. You changed more than you realize, she said. Daniel tilted his head. How so? She gestured subtly around the chamber. Today the galaxy witnessed something rare. He followed her gaze. Alien civilizations, rival empires, species that had spent centuries distrusting one another. All watching the same moment. The strong kneeling to the compassionate, Elira continued. The powerful honoring the humble. Daniel scratched his chin. That sounds like a speech. She smiled faintly again. It is history. Across the chamber, several ambassadors were already speaking quietly with one another. Not arguing, discussing, considering. The political storm that had begun earlier had shifted direction, not toward conflict, toward curiosity. Daniel noticed it. That's new, he muttered. Mara stepped beside him. You may have just improved humanity's reputation by several thousand%. Daniel grimaced. Great, no pressure. Elira looked toward the assembly once more. Then back at him. Our records speak of a guardian who would appear quietly. Daniel groaned softly. We're still doing the prophecy thing. She tilted her head slightly. Perhaps the prophecy was misunderstood. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How? What? It did not promise a conqueror. She paused, only someone who would remind us what courage looks like. Daniel stood quietly for a moment, then he exhaled. Well, he said, if the galaxy is expecting miracles from me, it's going to be very disappointed. Elira shook her head gently. The galaxy does not need miracles. Her violet eyes softened. It only needs more people like you. For the first time since the moment began, Daniel didn't have a quick answer. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the summit protocols resumed. Delegates began returning to their seats. Conversations restarted, but the atmosphere had changed, where there had been tension. Now there was something else, respect. Elira turned toward the assembly one final time. Then she spoke clearly. The Aurelian Empire recognizes Daniel Hayes of Earth as a friend of our people. A murmur moved through the hall, not shock this time, agreement. Daniel rubbed his forehead. You realize this is going to make my life very weird. Elira's smile returned. It already has. Above them, the stars continued burning quietly beyond the glass dome. And somewhere in the endless politics of the galaxy, an ordinary human who once thought he was just doing his job had become something far stranger. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could echo farther than anyone ever expected.